The St. Charles County Veterans Museum is a 501c3 nonprofit business. The museum would not exist without the donations of our generous community. Your donations ensure the museum continues to share and preserve the stories of our veterans. Would you like to be part of something special? To donate, visit sccvetsmuseum.org and click on Donate. The Dog Tag Podcast may at times cover sensitive topics including, but not limited to, suicide, abuse, violence, severe mental illness, sex, drugs, and alcohol addiction. You are advised to refrain from watching or listening to the Dog Tag Podcast if you are likely to be offended or adversely impacted by any of these topics. Neither the company, host, director, or guests shall at any time be liable for the content covered, causing offense, distress, or other reaction. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only. The primary purpose of the Dog Tag Podcast is to educate. The views, information, or opinions expressed on the Dog Tag Podcast are solely the views of the individuals or guests involved and by no means represent absolute facts. The Dog Tag does not accept responsibility for their views or comments. This podcast is sponsored by the Renee S. Allstate Agency, located here in O'Fallon, Missouri. She is licensed in Missouri and Illinois and focuses on your personal and commercial insurance needs. Her office is located at 2764 Highway K, O'Fallon, Missouri 63368. She can be reached at 636-379-9556 or by email at reneeessry@allstate.com, reneeessary@allstate.com. If you are shopping for insurance and want an active agent that will educate and advise you on the coverage you need, reach out to her. Welcome to the Dog Tag Podcast at the St. Charles County Veterans Museum with your host, Jason Galvin and Jim Higgins. Today in studio, we have Colonel Robert Leeker, United States Air Force. Jim, go ahead and kick us off.
Well, thank you, Jason, and welcome, Bob. I guess I'm always intrigued when somebody comes in, your age, and all soldiers since 1973 have been volunteers. So, and you spent 38 years in the service. You likely had a choice. You didn't have to serve. So, how did you choose? Why did you choose to serve, and why did you choose the Air Force?
I was fortunate that I had family members. My brother and brother-in-law's brothers were all in the Air National Guard out at Lambert Field. So when I came out of high school, I didn't really know where I was going to go or what I was going to do. It made sense to go into the Air National Guard and find what I wanted to do. It's a good thing. It's a good program, for people that don't know exactly what they want to do. So I had the opportunity was given to me, and I had knowledge of the Air National Guard, so that's why I went into it.
Well, and your career is, I think, very fascinating in the fact that you started as an enlisted man, a one-striper, and you ended up a full colonel, right?
Yes.
And I mean that's quite a jump. Can you give us an idea what that career path looked for you and how you made that happen?
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. I was, I joined the Air National Guard, as you said, a one-striper. I was in avionics. I went away to basic training first at Lackland Air Force Base, and then went on to avionics training at Keesler Air Force Base. And while I was gone, I saw a lot of airplanes flying, never seen that before. So I was like, well, instead of working on them, which is great, I have huge respect for the maintainers of the airplane and all that, but I thought I'd rather fly them. So I came back and to the unit, and I had to get some college time in. 60 hours of college is all you needed at that time. Get my own flying, paid for my own flying, and then got into the Guard. They finally accepted me in as a pilot, went into pilot training. From there, it was just a matter of doing what you're supposed to do, being a good officer, being a good flyer, doing the things you're supposed to. And worked my way up, to run the place. So I was pretty impressed with that. Even I don't normally applaud myself, but and I think as I went through it, and when I became the wing commander, a lot of the enlisted people really thought that was cool. The people I knew, for me to be the lowest guy on the base, rank-wise, to become the highest. So, yeah.
So when you decided you wanted to be to fly, you go to, you're an air cadet, and how long until you start that till you get your wings? How long is that program?
It's about a year. No, I take that back. The whole time, for the wings, is just a year. If you're going to go off and be a fighter pilot, it's about a 2-year process. You first go to pilot training. I went to Meramec Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas, and that's about a year program, and that's when you do have your wings at that time. When you go through that program, they determine if you are fighter qualified, meaning you can fly a fighter type jet. And if so, and I was going back to a fighter unit, then you have other training to go for. So to answer your question, about 1 year to get your wings, but then beyond that, there's another year of training.
So you make me chuckle a little bit when I hear, another year to see if you can be a fighter pilot. Is that mainly because you're upside down, backwards, and vertical and supersonic?
Well, they determine that in pilot training, and they determine by your skills and how you fly the T37 at the time and the T38. Do you have the acumen to handle quick decisions? Doing the things that you just talked about, and how well you can do those tasks of flying in order to say that, okay, you are fighter qualified. Things in a fighter, and that's not demeaning to the guys who fly heavy airplanes at all, but things in a fighter happen very, very, very quickly.
Different stressor, so to speak.
Very, very different stressor. And like you say, upside down, going straight up one time, straight down the other, passing very close to airplanes at high speed. So,
well, the other thing that I think intrigues me, I've gotten to know you a little bit, but you were a base commander, you were a one-striper, you were a mechanic, but all said and done now, you consider yourself a fighter pilot most, don't you?
Yes. Yeah. Once a fighter pilot, I believe you're always a fighter pilot. At heart. You may not be able to do it anymore, but at heart that is. It's somewhat like, once you're a Marine, you're a Marine. In my mind, once you're a fighter pilot, you're a fighter pilot.
I've always heard there's nothing like flying in a fighter. It's like it's one of those things that you can't recreate somewhere else.
No, I mean, you can go out and watch the movie Top Gun, and Top Gun is probably the closest Hollywood movie I've ever seen that kind of mimics what we do as a fighter. Still isn't exactly what it is, but it comes close in that. But, flying a fighter is just awesome, to be able to do the things that we do in a fighter, just the maneuverability of them it's just amazing.
So you started off T38, I believe you said?
T37.
T37, that's a small jet?
A twin-engine jet, side-by-side cockpit.
Mm-hmm. And then you later on, from there you flew the F4, I believe, did you not?
Yes.
And that's an interesting plane from, I'm obviously not a pilot, but I hear it's definitely a love-hate with that plane. The people that flew it absolutely loved it. And then you have the purists saying, yeah, but you saw the thing coming how many miles away. And it was a unique aircraft.
Oh, it's an awesome airplane. I think McDonnell Douglas built, 6,000 or so of them airplanes, and they started coming in the 63s, time frame towards Vietnam, later in Vietnam era and all that. But an F-4 is just an awesome airplane. It was my first love. When people always ask me, what's your favorite airplane, F-4, F-15, B-2? And I always go with the story like it's a fighter. The first one you fly is like your first love in life. You always remember it. You always had the best times there. So it's a great airplane. And younger guys who never flew it, I knew F-16 pilots not too long ago that when they found out I flew F-4s, they wanted to talk to me. They wanted me to tell all the stories about, flying the F-4. And you're right. What we call the double ugly, you have F4, you could see it for miles. The early versions all smoked. The engine smoked. It was the later versions that they were able to stop that because the smoking engines, you could see miles away. So they eventually eliminated that.
So then you went to the F-15, which I believe that's still being used today.
Yes.
And, that had to, I guess it was a big difference between the F-15 and F-4.
Oh, yeah. Huge difference. The F-4 was multi-purpose, fighter, airplane, jack of all trades. We did conventional bombing. We got into laser-guided bombs. We did air superiority, just all kind of different missions and using different weapons and that. So Maverick was another one. So we did all that with that. When you got into the F-15, it was purely air superiority. That's all it does. Kind of a side note on that, I flew the F-4 for, I think it was 10 years. Went to weapons school in the F-4, and I thought the F-4 was a pretty good airplane. And I did, like I said, jack of all trades. I did all these different missions, fly low, fly high, bomb conventionally, lasers, all that stuff. So I thought when I went to the F-15, doing a single air superiority mission would be much easier. Well, I was wrong. The F-15 is such a outstanding high-tech airplane, much different than the F-4, that it was a lot more complicated. When you got solely into the air superiority world, flying that airplane, it was high-tech and a lot harder.
So what was the timeline for moving from one aircraft to the other? Was it based on where you were stationed or based on what the need was, or how did you move from one aircraft to the other?
Usually you usually stay in the same type of airplane. If you're a fighter pilot, you're always in a fighter. And I'll come back to that later, how we went to the B-2. But usually once you're in a fighter, you're always in a fighter. Now, in the Air National Guard, the airplanes will switch at the unit, and the pilots, train to the new airplanes because that airplane is now part of the unit. For instance, my unit at Lambert Field, the 131st Fighter Wing, 110th Fighter Squadron, had F-4s. When they went away and got F-15s, then you go through that transition. It's about a 6-month program to change from one fighter to the other.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So you were a fighter pilot. Now, you got in at the tail end of Vietnam then, right?
I joined in 71, never saw Vietnam. I was an enlisted guy from 71 to about 76, I believe, yeah.
So you probably, I guess it's fortunate you never got into a dogfight, I guess I'd say. But you trained certainly to be in a dogfight. How did they train you to participate in a dogfight?
Well, that's when you're in the fighter. Let's take it to the F-15 world. It's the same thing in the F-4, but it seems to be more relevant in the F-15 since that's the only mission you did. So let me back up. First of all, the thing that's when you are in flying training, going all the way back to UPT, undergraduate pilot training, you are taught close flying, flying very close underneath an airplane, formation flying. That's one of the things that they grade you on how well you do in that. So you get used to flying close to other airplanes in maneuvering. You can go all type of maneuvers very close to another airplane. But when you get so that's the start of it, and that's how they judge to see if you can be a fighter pilot. When you get back into the flying the actual fighters, and like I said, I'll go to the F-15, you have different types of flying, different types of dogfighting, if you want to say it. The first one you start out is one airplane against the other. And you can be put into what's called an offensive position to where you are behind the other airplane, and it could be anywhere from 3,000, 6,000, 9,000 feet back, and then there's a fights on call, and it starts. And so you just learn to maneuver just like the World War II pilots, or high yo-yos, low yo-yos. There's all kind of maneuvers that you do, and you're taught them just through flying training. And so the first thing is one-on-one dog fighting, and then it expands from there to where it could be 2v1, 1v2, et cetera. Does That makes sense. Yeah.
It does.
My guess is dogfighting in the real world where you were at was nothing like they show in Hollywood. You're 300 yards behind the other plane, and especially as you get into an F-15 where you've got missiles that are long range.
Yeah. But you get in very close. You know, you have rules of engagement. If I remember correctly, you could, when you are dogfighting, you could not get any closer when you're attacking than 500 feet. So you would have to break off an attack, prior, so you would pull out away from it 500 feet. So, but you do get close.
So tell us a little bit about your timeline of what kind of bases you were at, and then how it ended up being a commander of the base. Correct?
The Air National Guard is different. You know, you are in a unit, and you kind of stay there. You know, that's one of the good things about the Air National Guard versus being an active duty person who moves all over. Air National Guard unit, you're home base there. Okay. Now, in the F-15 especially, you deploy other places. We did a lot of time over flying out of Turkey and doing what's called Operation Provide Comfort, Operation Northern Watch, flying over northern Iraq when Saddam was still in power, trying to keep him and his forces away from bombing the Kurds up in the north. So we would do those missions, okay? We did Operation Southern Watch. Or you may go to a deployment just for training in Singapore, or deployments in Europe, stuff like that. So you would take, your airplanes and go for 2 weeks, a month or so and do these type of training missions. So we traveled all over the world.
Okay. Yeah, I know Turkey pretty well. I used to live at Incirlik Air Base.
Well, that's where I've been there a lot. I think I did 2 or 3. I did 1 Operation Provide Comfort and 2 Operation Northern Watch. I think we'd be over there for a month at a time.
Okay.
That's what we would fly out of. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of that terminology sounds familiar to me, the Kurds and things of that nature. So
yeah, we would take off out of Incirlik. It was pretty interesting. Take off out of Incirlik and to get into northern Iraq, there's what we would call a gate. Can't remember the name of the town right now. But we would take off out of Incirlik and fly all along just the border, just north of Syria. And then we would punch into Iraq from there and do our combat, patrols up in that area. Yeah.
So kind of like in comparing it to like the corporate world where you have like an individual contributor and then a manager. So you have the pilots and then the commander. Is the commander still an individual contributor or more of a manager of the individual contributors or the pilots?
He still flies. He's still part of it. And I probably didn't answer your question about how I got to be the wing commander. It's just, I don't know. You just work hard and continue to do the job. You do different jobs as you go through the squadron. You could be a training officer, and then you move up to a scheduler, then eventually you can be the what's called the director of ops, and then I became the fighter squadron commander and the ops group commander. Each position gives you a different level of command, and then eventually I became the wing commander. As far as the wing commander, you are managing an entire base. I had 1,024 people working for me at the 20 F-15s or so on the ramp. So you had 4 main subordinates in the organization. One ran operations, one ran maintenance, one ran what was called the support group, which is all the CE, HR, finance, stuff like that. Then there was a medical group. They had a hospital and that. So you run all of that, through your subordinate, 4 subordinate, main subordinate commanders and that. So you still fly, though. You still fly and keep current. A little bit harder to be proficient like you would like to.
Yeah.
Because you got a lot of other stuff going on.
Well, I'm still fascinated by the idea of your career starting as a one-striper, becoming a base commander and a full colonel. Hollywood paints a picture of fighter pilots as being a little, I don't know what the right word is.
Arrogant?
I wouldn't know if I'd say arrogant, but they're, they live a different life. I mean, it's and yet they tied you down at one point and you were at a desk a good deal of your time. That would have been a tough transition for a fighter pilot, I would have thought.
Oh, it is. It's extremely hard because for myself, I wanted to go fly. That was my whole thing. And once I got past the working on them, I wanted to fly them. So that was in my heart. Once you get that in your belly, it's hard to get rid of. So, and then, like you say, to move to a desk, it just kind of, you have to refocus yourself. You become the CEO of a large corporation, in essence, like that. So you can't have all the fun anymore that you used to. And a side note kind of story is that my secretary and others on base would always know when I came back down from flying a mission. They said, you would be smiling.
It was written all over your face.
It was written all over my face,
Well, the other part of that is base commander. You've got a lot more responsibilities, and you're not just over the Air Force guys at that point. You're over ground troops, everybody, right?
Well, when I went to combat back here in St. Louis, it's just 1,024 are airmen, Air Force people. Yeah.
But you were over at the base there, and you were in charge of ground troops.
In Iraq?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, no, I take that back. I was not in charge of them. They were tenants on my base. Kirkuk, the base that I ran, I took care of all the infrastructure. I had 800 or 900 of my own people who did the command and control, logistics, all kind of different jobs. I had a hospital. We controlled all the airspace in the northern third of Iraq. On what you're talking about is there was the 3rd Infantry Brigade from Schofield Barracks was there. There was 2,000 or 3,000 of them that resided on the base. Okay, I had no control over them, but I ran all their facilities. I was the one who supplied them what they needed. The other one was the 2nd to 6th Cav. They had the helicopters on the other side of the base. I took care of them. They did not come underneath my command per se. There's a lot of people on the base. CIA and DIA and all these what I call spooks were all on the base. They didn't report to me. I just took care of them.
It's just such a different task running a base and being a fighter pilot, one man, one plane.
Yes.
It's very different. Along with that came a lot more responsibilities on that base. You oversaw a lot of the operations and responsible for it. You had a hospital. There was casualties coming in there. So, one of the things that I think is a little bit, I don't think the public understands it, but people think about PTSD and they think about boots on the ground, the grunts. And yet there's stressors, there's stress of any kind that happens throughout everybody at the base. Can you kind of talk about some of the stress that you saw and how it was affecting and what was your role in trying to help the troops?
Yeah, combat is different. Running a base is different, when you're in combat versus peacetime. A lot of stressors. But the foremost thing from a commander side is that you have to make sure the mission is getting done. What does that mean? That everybody knows there's communication, what's going on. Everybody is behaving in the way they're supposed to. And that a lot of the stressors, obviously, is coming when you are routinely under attack with rockets and mortars coming in. So everybody has to do their job in order to get through that. That means even leaving your quarters. For my staff, we had to leave our quarters wherever we were and go to a central facility, a base operations center, to recover the base. So, that's a stressor. You already mentioned the hospital, the wounded coming in. We had a level 2 trauma center was our hospital. So what would happen is the injuries would occur in the field, and I facetiously say that the Army would field dress them, and then they would be choppered into our base where we would take them, from there, and we would treat everything except where we got into head wounds, We didn't have the right equipment to analyze that. And but either or, we would take care of them the best we could, operate them and everything, and then send them down to Balad, which was a level 1 trauma center. So that's a stressor. So you have the shelling, rockets and mortars. You have the wounded. You have all those things going on all the time. They become part of your life. And then the other stressor that happens is if people don't stay busy, they can get into trouble. So on base. So you have to keep the people focused in their jobs, keep them motivated, the best you can.
Does a combat base replicate anything from a peacetime base as far as function and availability of resources like a gym or any type of those kind of facilities that you would normally find on stateside base? Sure.
Yeah. Not everything. We didn't have no golf course, but there was a gym. The Army had a gym. There was another one too, a base gym. So there's 2 gyms on base that we could use. There was some soccer fields or kickball fields and stuff like that. There was a BX, PX, whatever you want to call it. There was that. There was food kiosk in one court. So there was things that you could, go do and get different types of food versus going to the normal dining facility. So there was barbers. There was all that stuff on base, yeah.
So they were pretty much taken care of, not in the most comfortable way because they were overseas in a combat zone, but there was some comfort on base that they could look towards when they were off or when they had some downtime.
Yeah, by all means.
What did you find most challenging when it came to having to take care of things that you didn't want to take care of, like disciplining, whatever it might have been, where there was a disciplinary action that you had to take and it may not have been something very comfortable for you? Did you have people that did that for you, or did you have to manage that as the commander?
Each commander and many sub-commanders below you, they're responsible to do that. But inevitably, if they can't resolve it, it'll roll up to you, it keeps rolling uphill. The one case, 2 security police in stateside started playing games with their guns, and which was a no-no. And when they came over to the theater, it blew up. One threatened the other with blank guns on the stateside before they deployed. When it came over, it was they became very hostile, and their commander couldn't handle it. So it eventually would roll up to me in order to handle it. And in fact, at that time, we had the National Guard Bureau involved, the 1-star down at Balad involved, trying to resolve this whole thing. Other things like people wanting to go home, they couldn't go home. I couldn't release them to go home because they were homesick or whatever. Or you would get into a guy-gal thing, and when you get into combat, you have General Order number 1, no alcohol, no man, woman, fraternization, none whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So you would have to deal with them things all the time.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, you're managing just like you would at any other time. It's just heightened because you're in a combat zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like running a company or corporation, but somebody's throwing bombs at you.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned that every once in a while missiles did come in. I kind of look in my visualization of this is you're on a base, very protected area. You really don't want your people going beyond the wire.
They can't.
Be defense. Yeah. So you're kind of you never know when it's going to happen. Were there regular rocket attacks that came in? And that had to have been very stressful for the people not knowing. A big subtle difference is if you're infantry, you're going into combat, it's right in front of you, but you're kind of just waiting for it to happen. That had to have been really stressful to your guys.
Yeah, it was. The first thing you would hear, the first reports would come from the guard towers, and then, that there was, they saw flares or they saw a rocket coming in, and then you would get the battle stations condition red call would go out. And, it's very stressful. Repeat that question again.
Well, it's you've got a lot of stress. you can't leave the base, so you're in very tight quarters. I'm sure you had recreation, but the stress relief was limited in the fact that you just couldn't go off base and do anything because there was other issues off base.
Yeah, people were not allowed to go outside the wire without my approval, and we only did that on rare occasions. My comm group would have to go downtown to service some of the communications at the embassy, something like that, but they couldn't leave without my approval. And yes, the rockets and mortars would come in, and at any time, they could come in. We had one instance early on in my tour over there where they would come in every time the sun went down, usually around 7:30. We had one guy that would shoot from Kirkuk. There was a river valley that went around the base, and he would shoot from the south side. When it went down, the sun went down, he'd come out with his 107 millimeter rockets and launch them in, 2 or 3 of them at a time. So I named him Rocket Randy because he would attack all the time around 7:30, and you knew that. But then as we were there, it got more complex where they were bringing in grenades, launching grenades in, and larger shells, projectiles into the base, and that could come at any time.
So how does the role of a base commander, and probably more the guys underneath you, but we're saying that there was a lot of stress, there was that fear. We've kind of also talked about that you don't have to be infantry to feel that, and develop PTSD. How do you deal with that on a base, where it's not your conventional combat, it's just you never know when a round's coming in. Did you see a lot of people, your soldiers, suffering from, that? Did you get a lot of them requests saying, hey, I need to go home?
No, I mean, for the most part, when they go to combat, when I take the Air Force people like myself, at least you're going into a combat zone, full-up combat zone. You're going to be on base, but you know that. The potential is there. And you're a professional, so you focus on your job. So most of the time it won't affect you. Most of the people are working hard and doing what they have to do. Now, there'll always be, some that once they're there for the first time and the first rocket comes in, it'll get their attention. And that where the staff had to focus onto them and say, make sure that you do the proper, things in order to take care of yourself. You have to wear your battle gear when we tell you to wear your battle gear. When you hear conditioned red, and if you're in the defect dining facilities, you have to sit down and put your back up against the wall. So it was responsibility mainly of my seniors, sergeants, and those people to make those things happen. And you have to make sure that people do that to stay alive.
Was there a ramp-up time from the time that they got to the base for their first time till they did their job, or was it like you hit the ground running and you're doing your job?
Running.
Okay.
You hit the ground running.
So they're learning these things of what you're supposed to do in case this happens on their way there. They get a briefing once they're there. How do they know what to do, I guess?
They know what to do prior to getting there. That's part of the Air Force training. I say Air Force because that's all I did. But they are taught that peacetime in the United States, in the stateside and all that. So they know what to do. They practice it maybe once a year in exercises. But when they get over there, it may take them a little bit to realize that, hey, this is the real thing. And I've got to do those things I was trained to.
So, Bob, you were over in Iraq at the base. How long were your tours over in Iraq?
I was at that time, the Air Force was doing 4-month tours, not including travel time and spillage. So my time over there was just about 5 months.
Okay. So you deployed a number of times throughout your life. Have you been to any exotic places, any great places?
Singapore was pretty exotic. I spent some time there.
Don't they call that a fine country because they'll fine you for anything you do wrong?
Spitting on the sidewalk or whatever. But yeah, Singapore, Okinawa a little bit, Mainly in Europe, anywhere from England throughout Germany. We'd always pass through Spain on our way to Turkey. Turkey is a pretty neat place. Turkey is a pretty exotic place in my mind. And I'd like to go back. We went to when we had time on the weekend, like I went up to Cappadocia one time, which is a really neat area. Took a trip down to Antioch, which is right next to Syria. St. Paul's Church was out of Antioch. So, there's places like that. So, yeah, it was a great time.
Did your wife ever get to travel with you?
Only on the good trips. Yeah, she'd go to Hawaii with me. She came over to Germany to see me. I was working over there for 4 months one time. She came over for a while. So, yeah.
What's the communication like while you're overseas working in a base where you're at a combat zone? Do you get to call your family a lot? Do you get to communicate with them and see them via video chat or anything like that, or is it pretty much closed off? How does that?
No, you can talk. I was fortunate because I was commander of the base. I had the ability in my quarters, in my trailer, to pick up the phone and have a service line that would take me back to my base in St. Louis, and they could connect me. But there's always ways to communicate back. It was very, very easy to communicate back for the most part.
And then kind of, off the back of that, how did your family handle you being gone for 4 months at a time? Was there resources that they were able to tap into to be able to talk about what they were going through and things of that nature?
Oh, sure. The Air Force is great, and I'm sure the other services are great also. The families, there's family support groups on each of the bases. Like the Air National Guard base at Lambert has its own family support group. So when you are deployed, that group stays in touch with your family. For instance, my garage door opener broke while I was gone, so somebody from the family support group, volunteers go over and gets that repaired. So your family is being taken care of for the most part.
So you can really concentrate on your mission.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to, and you can do that. That's all you have to do that. You have to concentrate on the mission when you're over there. You can't be thinking a lot of other stuff.
So your last assignment was the base commander, is that correct then? Mm-hmm. Okay. So how close were you to retirement at that point?
I retired from that.
Okay. So 38 years, and then you came home, retired, and we hear a lot of veterans say the first day I didn't put the uniform on was very strange. I mean, can you relate to that? Or
yes, I can. 38 years at going in and out of Lambert Field, the Air National Guard base at Lambert Field, and then all of a sudden not having to get up and go there, basically not put the uniform on, and you're at home. So it's hard to explain, but there's some relief, like I'm done working, but the other side, it's like, now what do I do? I myself didn't have a exit plan, which I should have. We were fully able to retire, financially, and family was great. But I don't know when it really comes down to it if the wife was ready for me to be around all the time. I always tell the story. I won't digress too much, but I was about 4 or 5 months into retirement. We're sitting on our screen porch drinking a cup of coffee one morning, and my wife goes, hey, I'm going to go to the store to pick up a few things. And I said, okay, well, I'll go with you. She looked at me and she goes, we don't have to do everything together. And that's when I had to go find another job.
Do you ever look up in the sky when you see a fighter and say, man, I wish I was back in the saddle?
Oh, yeah. But I also realize I can't do that.
Yeah.
And can't do it because I'm too old for it, but also my body couldn't handle it. The fighter is very, very tough on your body. I have significant back and neck. I've had neck surgery, significant back injuries, or issues, I should say, from flying those high G fighters. So
you give a lot up with the body there.
Oh, yeah. It's very stressful on the body to fly a fighter.
But before I forget it, but you also moved briefly to the B-2 bomber, which is that's quite a bit bigger than F-15, is it not?
It's funny that the B-2 bomber is about the same length longitudinally as a F-15, but the wingspan obviously is much, much larger. So it's a huge airplane.
Is it kind of like driving a Corvette in a Corvair, or is it?
I would say it's like flying an F-15 be like a, I don't know, Lamborghini, Ferrari, and then you go to a Mack truck with the B-2. It's an awesome airplane, the B-2, but yeah.
Was that more electronics, even more electronics than the F-15?
No. Well, it had significant amount of electronics, in the B-2. I found it harder to operate the B-2 electronics just because of the way they were mechanized. The F-15 was very easy. It was extremely difficult, but the way the controls and the weapon systems worked was much easier to do in the Eagle, than the B-2.
Now, in the B-2, theoretically, you could carry nuclear weapons in that, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So, but I'm thinking you were briefly in that you probably didn't carry nuclear weapons? Or?
No, I was only in it for a year flying the B-2, and I was just starting to get into what's called a PRP, Personal Reliability Program, and that's a whole huge vetting system. So I never really got into nukes. I just did the conventional flying.
So the other thing we hear is you've got 38 years out. Your wife has very she subtly, if that's the right word, told you, hey, go do something else, right? I mean, were you kind of prepared to be able to move into a different career in the civilian life? It sounds like at one time you decided, I do need to do something else.
Initially, I wasn't prepared. I thought I retired from the military. I was 57 and everything would be fine. And it was fine, But I got extremely bored also, other than, the wife saying, go do something else. She didn't say that, but the issue with families in the military, as you can imagine, usually the spouse either, takes care of the household, and the other one is off running around the world. I was the guy running around the world and always doing stuff and gone 2 weekends a month, usually at least. And then she's taking care of the house. She has her own routine. The spouse has her own routine. And then when all that is over with and you try to come back into that, you are the outsider who's running around the world to try to come back into the household and now start directing things. Or trying to do things with your wife all the time, it just doesn't work. It's hard. You have to have an exit plan. I didn't have one when I first retired. That's why I went back to work as a contractor, and then was able to settle down a little bit and have an exit plan to come. Yeah,
I've heard veterans tell me before that preparing for that is very difficult, and they don't have as much resources as they feel like they should. Some of the training easily carries over to the civilian life. Some of the training does not, But do you think the military could do a little bit more to transition people into back to the civilian life?
Yeah, they could. They talk about it, and there's counselors and all of that. But, yeah, they could probably do more about it. You can go to hiring programs and stuff like that, but it's tough to come out and then try to find a job or move on or do something different. I think it is. Yeah.
Do you think it's more about satisfaction in a job or something different? And what I mean by that is you've flown all these planes, right? Mm-hmm. You've done some really intense things, and then you go to a job where you're an IT guy or you're a construction worker or anything that you can think of, right? And do you find or feel that it could be a job satisfaction mismatch versus a skill set?
It could be for some. What I found more than anything was, I considered myself as a base commander when I was trying to fill out applications. And you look how, I was actually the title as a wing commander, how do you marry that up with the corporate world? And I had to research, well, you're actually kind of a CEO of a large corporation. But a lot of the terminology in the military doesn't translate very easily to the corporate world. So you start trying to fill out resumes, and how do you tell the corporate world what you did in the military? Most of them don't understand that. So I actually went out and worked with a headhunter for a while, and to help me find the right verbiage in a resume that would marry up with the corporate world based on what I did in the military. So that crossover is hard in my mind, unless you are a IT guy and that is your job, and you come out, you'll probably find an IT type of job in the civilian world. But when you get into command structure type of stuff and trying to transition over, it can be difficult.
So you had 38 years. What did you learn about yourself through those 38 years? What life lessons did you learn? What did you learn that you liked a lot? Not besides flying the plane.
Like flying fighters, like
yeah. What else did you learn? I mean, you were administrative. You were a hands-on guy. You were so many things.
I think you learn more about yourself. You learn that especially when you get into the leadership positions, you need to learn who you really are. And one of the biggest things you have to learn is if you are an A-type personality, which most fighter pilots are, well, they all have to be that way to do what they do, that you can't expect other people to live and work at that same level you do. So you cannot be as demanding. You have to realize that not everybody walks in the same shoes that you do. And that took me a while to learn that, Overall, I think, the biggest thing is you learn and it deepens is your feeling for the country, for the flag, especially when you get into combat and you see what happens in there. You really realize how great the country is, and how awesome it is, and how lucky we are. When you go over to Iraq and see what happens over there, or these foreign countries like I've been, even the other ones that are not in combat, and then you return to the U.S., it's just like, holy cow, we got a great place here.
Absolutely.
If we can keep it.
Absolutely.
So looking back on military service there, what's your takeaways? Do you feel like, I ask a lot of veterans, do you think everybody should serve? What do you miss most about it?
I think everybody should serve. Draft. I was under the draft system, although I didn't get chosen, and I volunteered to get in because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. But I think everybody should serve. I think that would do great things. The way our country is now, there's a lot of kids out there that don't have good fathers or fathers at all. For them to get into military and learn that structure and discipline, is huge. I think it gives you a basis for the rest of your life, because that's what you have to do. You're talking about what you learn. You learn in the military how to live with other people, for one thing. You learn discipline. You learn how to work and live with other people in all types of environments, from peacetime to combat to living in a foxhole, with somebody, there's just so many lessons in there. Yeah.
What do you miss most about your time in the service? We hear a lot of people say that there's friendships and bonds that develop in the military that you can never find in the civilian world. And, of course, you've been the enlisted guy and you've been the officers. And I would think the officer rank doesn't have quite the camaraderie that the enlisted guys do. But what do you miss most about your time in the service?
Well, first, you're right. I really believe that the enlisted corps have it's a different type of camaraderie, but they become very close, and it's a whole different world than the officer world. The officer world, flying fighters, it's very competitive. It's a different world when you get into that officer world, flying world, and that. What do I miss most? I guess it's a sense of satisfaction about, what you do every day. You get up every day, it is disciplined. You go to work, you work with other people, you're doing good things for the country. It's not that you can't do that outside, but I miss some of the friendships that were in there, although there are a lot of us old timers that, get together, from time to time. I'm not certain.
Well, we've talked about a lot of stuff and learned a lot about your career and your experiences. Is there anything else you want to leave the listener with tonight that's really important to you or for your message before we sign off tonight?
The biggest thing is, like I kind of alluded to, what do you learn out of it is, the country, how great it is. I mean, there's so many people out there that don't really understand how good they have it out there. When you serve in combat zones, when you travel around the world and see the things that are out there, everybody's got to, step back in the U.S., in my mind, and just really, really, really realize how good they got it. And then the other piece of it, kind of self-centered or military-centered, I should say, is that they have to, the people who don't or have not served in the military really need to try to understand what the military veteran has done. It's just hard to explain sometimes. It sounds fun that we went out and, I'm the guy who went out and flew fighter airplanes around the world. It's really cool. But any person in the military, there's a price for that, being in the military. The impact on the family is just incredible. The impact, as on combat vets coming home is just incredible. So I just hope that the public over time can absorb that and understand that, and then thank a vet.
Very well said, and thank you, Colonel. We're going to go ahead and sign off from the Dog Tag Podcast at the St. Charles County Veterans Museum. The Dog Tag is brought to you by the St. Charles County Veterans Museum. The museum is a 501c3 nonprofit business. Do you like our podcast? With your support, we'll continue to bring you great programming. If you'd like to donate, go to sccvetsmuseum.org and click on Donate.